Hi there, I'm Mark Isero, and this is the Highlighter Podcast. Hello and welcome to the 18th episode of the Highlighter Podcast. Very, very excited that you're here to listen. It's going to be a great episode. Before we get to that episode, I want to thank everybody who came out last Thursday night to the Highlighter Happy Hour number 2 over in Oakland. There were 28 of you there, all told, so it was great. It was great to have everybody there talking about the articles and also meeting other wonderful people. So just want to let you know also that we're going to have it again. Highlighter Happy Hour number 3 is going to be in San Francisco in a few weeks. More details about that soon. So now I'm totally excited to announce to you who the guest is this week. For the first time ever, a former student of mine is on the show, and I'm very excited to have her. Her name is Kati Parker. She's going to be talking about food, and she's going to be talking about gentrification and also appropriation. So let's get right to it. This is Kati Parker. Well, hi, Kati. How are you?
Great. How are you?
It is going great. Thank you so much for asking. Thank you so much for being on the show. I wanted to see if you could introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. I'm Kati Parker, and my maiden name is Hirigoyen, and I used to be a student of yours back when you taught in Fremont. And we were in We the People, and we made it to state.
We did make it to state, and for folks who don't know about We the People, it was pretty serious.
Mm-hmm.
It was a government class, but it was more than that. From your perspective, what was it, and why were you in the class?
It was, I got into it because it was kind of like an option of, honors government, and it sounded, it was, I think even it was explained to us that, oh, this is kind of different, even signing up for it. We had to take a test, and it's going to be about the Constitution and civics, and it appealed to, I think it was, a few of my friends were in it too. It was, oh, let's go for it. Okay. And yeah, we didn't know, I don't think signing up for it, we knew what an adventure it was going to be with the, going to Sacramento and memorizing as much as we did and learning. I think we were pretty engaged for, and especially for the time, because that was right about the 2000 election. So we graduated in 2000. So things were starting to heat up.
Definitely. We did not know about that election yet, but
Mm-hmm.
I remember it was the first time that I had taught government. And also it was, this class had sort of like a long tradition of going to the state competition. And so here I was, a fairly young teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and all that, I don't think that I ever told you all, but it was like, okay, I just need to make sure that we do a good job, and it was sort of like this intense sort of thing where I think that you just put a whole lot of trust in me, because before me, there was this teacher who had been there for a long time, and she did great. And I still remember when we were called in to go to Sacramento, and it was like, oh, finally, we got to go. Did you think that it was a surreal experience, or did you just expect that we were going to go to the competition?
It was surreal for me. I don't know what I was expecting, but it was definitely like, wow, and when we were, I think the final day, maybe it was, that we were actually at the Capitol doing our speeches there. It was like, wow, this is where people who are actually politicians sit, right here.
It was crazy. And we were actually, our group was the first to go to the finals.
Mm-hmm.
The school had gone to the competition, but not to the final day. And so that was, I just thought it was the best thing. Now sort of removed from that, now you're no longer a student, obviously, in high school, but politics are crazy. Do you think that the We the People experience would have prepared you for anything that's going on now?
That's a good question. I always try and think to myself, like, maybe it always prepares me. Like I look at it through, like, you taught us how to read articles in like a critical way. And, like you've always said, even in this podcast, look at an article, the source, what they're trying to say, and look at the actual facts in the article and where did they get those facts, all that we learned, we kind of learned a lot of that in your class. So it's hopefully helped me as an adult. I like to think I, do pretty good with the information I get, but I guess everyone does, right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember, I think you were in Unit 2, is
Yeah.
that correct? And that was about like the founding period. And it's just so funny given that unit I felt was about like maybe one of the most patriotic units because it's like who can go wrong with Madison and
Mm-hmm.
all those founders and all the framers. And now it's sort of like, wow, what kind of government, do we have?
Oh
But
my
you know what?
God, no.
I still have a lot of hope. Maybe we can figure it out. But I feel, Katie, though, I feel like you were a reader even before that class. So can you say a little bit more about sort of like your life in reading and how it's sort of changed? I mean, I'm very excited that you are a subscriber to the Highlighter, but can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. So, I mean, I've always been a reader since I was a kid, so you're right, but I'm like kind of a slow reader. Like, so I know some people could read like 2 or 3 books in a weekend. I can't. I kind of get, absorbed into different passages and stuff, but I love the highlighter. I read a few other newsletters. I think I told you before, I read Lenny Letter, which is kind of more geared, like I would say maybe feminist, I don't know. But it's kind of entertaining. It's not very heavy. And I love reading, newspaper kind of sections. And book-wise, I was an English major, so I read a ton of fiction, obviously, doing that. But anymore as an adult, I read like mostly nonfiction memoirs and stuff like that. So yeah, reading the highlighter, really love reading these kind of articles. So every Thursday when I get this, I'm like, yes, it's Thursday at 9:10. And, if I have time at work, I'll put them up and I'll read, every hour I'll kind of read about 10 minutes of one and kind of go through the next one. It's pretty interesting. And a lot of times, like I've told you, I'll have a discussion with my husband. I read this article and, what do you think about that? And,
This thing about your husband, I'm interested in as well,
mm-hmm.
because some people who subscribe, their partner does also subscribe, but then some people don't even want to talk about the articles with it. So what is your style with your husband?
I'll say, hey, I read this really interesting article that I still call you Mr. Isero. Mr. Isero sent me, and what do you think about that? Especially if it's political, because he and I are very similar, but then he tries to see it from another angle, like, well, maybe there's another point here or something. So, and then sometimes we'll go off on a tangent, but then sometimes I do move on to another article. And, for this week, since, I knew we were going to talk about the food related articles, I talked to him a lot about it actually. And I was like, well, what do you think about that? And, do you think that's fair or where do you draw the line and stuff like that to get your, opinion on that? Cause he definitely has opinions, but he's like, like he said, I don't want to be on this podcast though, because I sound smart in my house, but I'm
Well,
not sure how I'll
he's
sound on a
definitely in.
podcast.
Yeah, I'm
I'm
trying to
not
figure
either.
it out myself. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because on the food article, so I'm really happy that you want to talk about the food article, which talked about the difference between soul food and Southern cooking. Seems like this is something that you have been interested in. When you read it this time, what were your first impressions?
So reading the one from High Snobriety, the gentrification of soul food. I just really, it's like that saying, I believe everything it's telling me because it's exactly what I want to hear. I couldn't agree more with the article, really. And then when I was reading it, the first page or so, I was thinking to myself, it's just like when we had jazz and rock and roll. They were African American forms of music that white people co-opted and made money off of, and then they mentioned that in the article. Agree
It was
with
like you
that.
predicted the
Is that
second or third page of the article.
Yeah, but I mean, it's And then the question becomes there, like, of course, to me, there's no argument. Paula Deen, she's a bigot, right? She's kind of a horrible person, at least from what we hear, right? There's no denying if she actually said those things, she's kind of a horrible person. But, are the Rolling Stones horrible because they took blues and, rock and made it into something? So that's where it's hard where do you decide what is paying homage to something versus what is making money,
Right,
being
exactly.
opportunistic.
And there's also at least one extremely excited highlighter subscriber who's been on the podcast, Marnie, and she loves Justin Timberlake, just absolutely love. And so I think that it's probably difficult for her to not listen to him, even though a lot of people say that he's appropriated music as well. You said that there might be a line here, I guess, between appropriation and appreciation. Where do you draw that line? And when you talk, say, to your husband or to other people, what have they said?
I don't know. Maybe to me, I was kind of talking to them yesterday. Like maybe it's the spirit of the thing. Like, are you approaching it with respect? Another thing I just saw recently was, I haven't been to the shop yet. It's called the Ramen Shop in Oakland. And some former chefs of Chez Panisse that made a ramen shop. But they went to Japan and made sure they did everything exactly how ramen shop is in Japan. Is that profiting off of ramen, or are they trying to bring it to people? So I don't know, right? And I talked to my sister-in-law is Chinese American, and she said she was actually more upset with people who didn't know something. In other words, hey,
Right.
I've never heard of dim sum. What is that? Why don't you know about that? You've lived in the Bay Area for 30 years. So so that was her, almost like the opposite
I agree
of
with
it,
you. Like sometimes I'm ignorant to a lot of things, and yes, maybe I should be doing my homework. And I find though that sometimes when I have, let's say I'm talking to somebody and then they ask a question out of ignorance, I sometimes appreciate that in some ways. It's like at least they're trying to understand,
Mm-hmm.
and at least they're trying to engage, rather than sort of like having no appreciation or no curiosity. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. And, you kind of, at least for me, when I ask questions, I always am afraid maybe this is going to be a stupid question. But, so there's an amount of being brave it takes to ask someone, I'm sorry, what is this that I'm eating?
Right.
I know I should know,
I guess
but
my question, especially in such a diverse area as the Bay Area, like let's say, so as a white person, I guess my question is like, why am I and other white people not actually going to ramen places? Like, why are some white people sort of more comfortable in a ramen place run by a white
Mhm.
person? Like, that's the thing that I don't understand. It's like, for some reason, like the
Right.
sort of trendy places where white people see more white people are somehow safer to eat at. And I'm trying to figure
Mhm.
out that, like, what is the actual difference? And then why can't white
Right.
people feel more comfortable taking the next step and maybe feeling a little uncomfortable? What's your view on that?
Well, I'm someone who I actually prefer restaurants that are, like you said, maybe it would be a little more uncomfortable. I can't read the menu. It's not in English. I might have to point at something, and it's great. And sometimes I feel like the food tastes better. You know, if you like if you like foods that are pretty diverse, Fremont, I think, is really great for that. And you don't, you know, it's not very glamorous, but you're going to get we have a ton of Thai, Indian, Vietnamese, Chinese, and they're all, to me, we have our favorites that we
Yeah, I
really love.
remember
So,
even when I was teaching in Fremont, and especially at our school, it was extremely diverse, and yet the community was trying to figure out what to do with that diversity. And so now, I mean, and actually work in
mhm.
Hayward now, which is different from Fremont, but similar in some ways. How do you feel like the community there has changed, especially in the last 5 to 10 years? Do you feel like that there is a little bit more curiosity, and also more acceptance, or is it also still a little bit? Because I felt like back then there was a little bit of fear of the changes in the community.
Mm-hmm.
How would you characterize it now?
I would say I still, if judging by, I don't know if you can judge by a group, like I belong to a few Fremont groups on Facebook. I don't know if you could judge by the comments there, but I think it's a generation thing. So I'm noticing the people who are commenting, I wish Fremont was how it was, they are more of the older generation. So it's hard also to see, the cost of housing go up, right? It's just that's a change that doesn't necessarily have to do with one thing or another. So it's just all a bunch of changes that I think maybe younger people are a little more, and when I say younger, I don't know if I mean younger than, I don't know what age, but I don't know, maybe it's a generalization too, but it's, they're more comfortable with it or trying different things, like, oh, I think I'm going to go to, this new place that just opened that's does Burmese food. I don't know. Let's try it. Okay. So diversity, I'm seeing it a lot more with people being very accepting, and also the narrative, especially in this, current political climate, is Fremont is a safe place. It's a diverse place. We welcome immigrants. You should feel safe here. You've helped us build a community, and make it as good as it is.
Is that I do feel like the Bay Area sometimes is, everybody says that they're a certain way, but there is actually a lot of political diversity. And I remember when teaching at Fremont, I think that we did a very good job, and not just in We the People, but also in the other government classes that I taught. There was a recognition that there was a political diversity, but actually people knew how to talk to each other across difference, which I would argue is much harder to pull off in places like Berkeley or Oakland or San Francisco. I guess my question to you is, you have your sort of political, your political development. Do you find yourself now, especially in our political climate, are you finding that your filters have gone up and that your bubble has sort of developed, or do you find yourself also talking to people who are different?
It's kind of hard to say because, we do live in a bubble, even family wise, we all kind of lean somewhere in the middle or the left. And it's just hard to say because I do know people who were more Republican, and in this current climate, they're like, well, I'm conservative, but I'm not like, XYZ. So I don't know where I am now. So it's, in general, like you said, maybe in this area or I don't know, it is a little easier to talk politics with people. But having said that, I have talked to people who are still pro-Trump, and I've got to be honest, that's kind of, I try and see where they're coming from, but it's kind of hard. I could see where people are coming from if they're just Republican in general or conservative. But
well, and I also think,
different.
going back to the article too, this idea about appropriation, I feel like some of the terms that some people are comfortable talking about, say, for example, white privilege and appropriation and all of these terms that I would argue used to be more of the vocabulary of sort of elitist colleges. Now I feel like more folks are starting to talk about it, and it is creating more of a discord, where, like, as an educator, for example, as a white educator, I think that I've been sort of comfortable with at least the vocabulary for a while. But even with my friends who are outside education, it may be newer. So I think that that's partly also why it's so hard, because somebody might read this article about about fried chicken and just say, you know what, it's just fried chicken. Everybody has fried chicken. Like, why can't we just enjoy the fried chicken?
Right.
What would you say to somebody who would argue back? Like, what is the big deal here? Like, why can't we just go out and eat the food that we want?
I would say, and like you said, bringing into that the hot chicken article, and it seemed to me that in that article, the writer of the article, who I actually really enjoyed his writing style. He's just having an adventure, and he's trying to get that capsaicin. He's not entirely looking at it from, he brings up history, but he wants an adventure. But he does admit, the tourist place where all the tourists fly into, that hot chicken place is not authentic. It's not really authentic, like, for instance, Prince's is. So from the lens of, should people just be enjoying this, or should they know the history? Looking at both the articles, like you said, these, especially African Americans, you could look at any, quote, poor population through history. Like, I'm part Mexican, they took food that is, the best they could get, and they didn't want to waste it, and they turned it into something delicious. And that's a lot of what, African American food was about. They, like it said, pork rinds, kind of a, not the best cut of the pork. They turn it into something that is really delicious. And, I think knowing that history, and then knowing even in modern times, modern day, current contemporary times, that so many of these populations have food deserts. So they're trying to do the best they can, with the ingredients that they have to make it nutritious and tasty. I think it is important to know. But I don't know how you would go about informing people, because I do agree with you that it is important, but how do you make sure the tourists know that, the origins of this, that they're just, paying $25 for this chicken?
Yeah, and I would also say that so many of these debates and issues and deep debates where people are just not able to talk to each other, it, as a history teacher, like, it comes down to, for me, and I'm sure a lot of people, about the fundamental place of slavery in our history that we still have not been able to actually even begin to talk about. And I remember, like, sometimes when I would teach about slavery, a lot of students would just say, hey, I already know about it. Why do we always have to talk about it? And yet, that was like the most important thing. So whether it's about food, whether it's about appropriation, whether or not it's about sort of like people in our government talking about the cause of the Civil War, it just seems like slavery continues to be at the forefront of what we need to talk about.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, in light of the Black Lives Matter movement, it's like, well, why? Well, everyone matters. Well, why do we? Well, no, we need to talk about this. It's like the analogy of this person's house is on fire and this person's isn't. Well, all houses matter. Yes, but let's pay attention to the one on fire right now.
Totally.
Going back to the, food and the history of slavery, if you had read the
thank you for that.
Yeah, and so I kind of read his speech that he had just done in it sounded like maybe at the Culinary Institute with Jacques Pepin, but he kind of goes into that, like you said. He wants this to be, I liked his quote, collaborative, but also confrontational. Like, I know you don't want to talk about slavery, but we need to address this so we can move forward. But we have to address it and not pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah, and I think that's hard, because I think that especially in mixed groups, people of color, even though the conversation is necessary, often have a lot of the burden to stay in those conversations, where white people need to sort of be educated. And unfortunately, like, it's just, there's never really great ways to do it, but the solution cannot be not to do it. It's like, I guess nobody really likes conflict, but conflict is the only way forward, whether it's about appropriation or any of these issues.
Yeah, and like you said, the awareness does bring conflict. Like right now, people are talking more about it, But, maybe that's a good thing in the long run because it makes more
Yeah,
people
I think
aware.
so. I hope so. I really still want to believe in this
Mhm.
perhaps naive notion that by continuing to be in conflict, that we will get somewhere. Like I'm also reading a whole lot about what's happening at college campuses now, and how there's actually open protest, during classes, and how a lot of people are like, oh, that's horrible, that's
Yeah.
horrible. I still want to believe in what actually is the truth. And so if the truth right now is that we are deeply divided, and if the truth is right now that we
Hmm.
are in conflict, it's not like trying not to be in conflict would resolve the issue.
Right.
Katie, I have to awkwardly say thank you. And I have to awkwardly say thank you so much for being on the show. I wish that we could talk for more, but maybe next time we could have like a 2 or 3 hour show.
Yeah. Thank you.
I want to thank Katie yet again for coming on the show. I thought that it was just really wonderful to hear her views, and it's also great to have a former student. Don't you think that all former students should subscribe to the Highlighter? I definitely think that would be a good thing. If you agree with me that Katie was great, please let me know. And there's several ways you can do it. You can go over to iTunes and rate the show and offer a review, or you can email me at mark@highlighter.cc with your views. A lot of people, because they're listening to the podcast, it's harder for them to get over to email, but definitely do so. I want to see who's listening and who's appreciating the show. Also, I want to let you know that this Thursday at 9:10, as usual, there's going to be the newsletter, so be looking for that. But also for the month of November, starting this Thursday, there's going to be a contest. So be looking for that. There's going to be huge prizes, and I'm really looking forward to seeing who is really into this competition. So be looking for that. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a great, great week, and I'll see you on Thursday at 9:10 a.m. Have a great week.